The first officer reached the house at 11:47 p.m., expecting a domestic disturbance. A neighbor had called emergency services after hearing shouting through the walls, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. Then came a woman's scream. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make the street go silent. The house stood at the end of a quiet suburban lane, large enough to suggest comfort and private enough to hide almost anything. Porch lights burned against the darkness. One upstairs window was open. The front door was unlocked. Officer James Holloway entered with his hand near his weapon. "Police! Is anyone inside?" There was no answer. The living room looked as though a celebration had ended badly. A lamp lay shattered beside the sofa. A glass had rolled beneath a chair. One curtain hung partly from its rail. Then Holloway saw the body. A man lay on the hardwood floor near the center of the room, motionless, one arm twisted beneath him. Blood darkened his shirt and pooled beneath his shoulder. A woman sat several feet away. She was dressed in a pale evening blouse, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She did not appear injured. She did not run when the officers entered. She simply stared at the dead man as though waiting for him to speak. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Her eyes moved slowly toward Holloway. "No. Do you know this man?" For several seconds, she said nothing. "Yes. What happened here?" The woman lowered her eyes. "I don't know." It was the first answer she gave, and it would become one of the most important sentences in the investigation. Paramedics confirmed the man was dead before midnight. Detectives arrived soon afterward, sealing the house and separating the woman from the crime scene. His name was Daniel Reed, 32 years old. Financial consultant. No criminal record. No history of violence. According to the identification found in his wallet, he was engaged to be married. His fiancée's name was Emily Cole. That name changed the atmosphere inside the room. The woman sitting under police supervision was not a stranger to Daniel Reed. She was Emily's mother, Marianne Cole. Detective Sarah Mercer watched Marianne through the glass of the interview room. She was in her late 50s, composed despite the blood that had dried along one sleeve. She had not asked about Daniel's condition. She had not asked whether he was alive. She had asked only one question. "Has Emily been called?" Mercer noticed the hesitation before the officer answered. "Yes." Marianne closed her eyes. Outside, investigators photographed every broken object, every footprint, every trace of blood. Inside, Marianne's silence seemed heavier than the evidence surrounding her. Then a medical examiner handed Mercer a preliminary report. Daniel had been dealing with a serious medical diagnosis. Mercer read the line twice. Daniel Reed had recently tested positive for HIV. She looked through the glass at Marianne. For the first time that night, the case no longer looked like a murder born from a single argument. It looked like the ending of something that had been hidden for a very long time. Suddenly, unanswered questions multiplied. Who had known? How had Daniel contracted it? And why had he come to Marianne's house that night? The questions surrounding Daniel's death could not be answered by the house alone. To understand why he had been there, investigators had to go back to the people who knew him before the blood, before the sirens, before his name became a case file. That was where Emily Cole entered the story. Long before anyone suspected betrayal, Emily and Daniel looked like the kind of couple people trusted immediately. They had met through mutual friends, dated quietly, and gradually built a life that seemed almost effortless. Daniel was patient and ambitious. Emily was warm, practical, and fiercely loyal to the people she loved. Their engagement had been celebrated with champagne, photographs, and promises about the future. At the center of Emily's world was her mother. Marianne had raised Emily alone after her husband died years earlier. She had been the person who answered midnight calls, sat beside hospital beds, remembered birthdays, and stayed awake when Emily was heartbroken. To Emily, her mother was not merely family. She was safety. That trust mattered because Daniel had slowly become part of it. At first, Marianne seemed genuinely happy about the engagement. She welcomed Daniel into the family, cooked for him, asked about his work, and listened whenever he talked about Emily. Nothing appeared unusual. But small things began changing. Emily noticed that Marianne sometimes watched Daniel when she thought nobody was looking. The glances were brief, almost invisible, yet they carried a strange intensity. Whenever Emily entered a room, conversations occasionally stopped. She blamed herself for noticing. Perhaps her mother was simply adjusting to the idea that her daughter was leaving. Perhaps Daniel's confidence made Marianne uncomfortable. Perhaps families became awkward when marriage suddenly turned a boyfriend into a permanent member of the household. Emily never considered the possibility that something much darker was happening. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel arrived at Marianne's house carrying a bottle of wine. Emily was upstairs changing clothes when she heard laughter from the kitchen. She smiled. Then she heard silence. When she entered, Daniel was standing near the counter while Marianne held 2 glasses. "What were you two talking about?" Emily asked. Marianne smiled too quickly. "Nothing important." Daniel looked at her, then at Marianne. "Your mother was just telling me about your father." Emily felt the tension before either of them explained it. "My father?" Marianne lowered her eyes. "It's nothing." Daniel reached for Emily's hand. "We were remembering him." The explanation should have comforted her. Instead, something inside Emily tightened. Still, she dismissed it. She trusted Daniel. She trusted Marianne. And because she trusted both of them, she never imagined that the uncomfortable silences were warnings. Over the following weeks, those moments became more frequent. Marianne began sending Daniel messages about small things that did not seem to concern Emily. Daniel sometimes checked his phone and turned the screen away. When Emily asked about it, he laughed. Work. She believed him. Her mother gave a similar answer whenever Emily noticed her distracted. Just tired. Emily accepted that too. She had spent years believing that love meant protecting the people closest to you. She did not yet understand that sometimes the people you protect are the ones hiding the truth from you. And somewhere between those harmless explanations and the wedding plans, Marianne and Daniel began crossing a boundary that Emily could not see. At first, neither of them called it an affair. That would have made it real. Instead, they called it friendship. And that was how the secret began. A friendship that slowly became something neither could safely confess, even to themselves, anymore. At first, the secret was built from conversations. Marianne and Daniel began talking when Emily was not around. It was never supposed to become intimate. Daniel would stay after dinner, helping Marianne clear plates while Emily answered emails upstairs. Sometimes they discussed Emily. Sometimes they discussed marriage. Sometimes they discussed nothing that could reasonably explain why either of them wanted the conversation to continue. Marianne told Daniel about the years after her husband's death. She described the loneliness of raising Emily alone, the quiet evenings when the house seemed too large, and the fear that her daughter would eventually build a life that no longer had room for her. Daniel listened. That was what made him dangerous to her. He did not dismiss her grief or tell her that she should move on. He asked questions. He remembered details. He made Marianne feel visible at a time when she had begun believing that her entire identity existed around someone else. Daniel, meanwhile, began confiding in Marianne about his fears concerning marriage. He loved Emily. That part was real. But he worried about disappointing her. He worried about becoming trapped by expectations he could not name. Marianne seemed to understand those fears without judging him. Their conversations became longer, then more private, then necessary. A message in the morning became a phone call at night. A phone call became an excuse to meet for coffee. Soon, they were discussing things they knew they should never discuss. Marianne noticed Daniel's hesitation before he did. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel stood near the kitchen doorway. "This isn't right," he said. Marianne looked at him. "I know." "Then why are we still here?" She had no answer. The silence between them carried the answer neither wanted to speak. Their first kiss happened weeks later. Afterward, Daniel looked devastated. Marianne looked relieved. That difference should have frightened him. Instead, it pulled them deeper. The affair became a private world existing beside Emily's life. They met when they could. They deleted messages. They invented explanations. Every secret required another secret to protect it. Daniel repeatedly promised himself that it would end. He never kept the promise. Because whenever guilt became unbearable, Marianne reminded him that what they shared was not meaningless. "You understand me," she told him once. Daniel stared at the floor. "That doesn't make this right." "No," Marianne said quietly. "But it makes it real." Those words stayed with him. For Marianne, the relationship slowly became more than an affair. She began imagining a future she had no right to imagine. She resented Emily's plans without admitting why. Wedding discussions made her strangely anxious. Every time Daniel spoke about his fiancé, Marianne felt something inside her harden. She began acting as though Daniel belonged partly to her. She expected his calls. She questioned his absences. She became jealous when he spent time with Emily. Daniel noticed the change. "This has to stop," he said one afternoon. Marianne's expression changed. "Do you mean that?" "Yes." "Because you love Emily?" Daniel could not answer immediately. That silence was enough. Marianne looked away, wounded and angry. "You can pretend this was nothing," she whispered. "I can't." Daniel left without responding. For the first time, he understood that ending the affair would not simply mean walking away. It meant confronting someone who believed she had been promised a place in his life. And Marianne was beginning to believe that Emily was standing in her way. Neither woman knew what the other suspected. Emily continued planning the wedding, choosing flowers and discussing dates, while Marianne watched with a secret she could no longer contain. Daniel was caught between guilt and attachment, telling himself that honesty would eventually repair the damage. But secrets rarely disappear with time. Sometimes they deepen. And Marianne's growing possessiveness was about to turn that hidden relationship into something far more dangerous. The danger Marianne had sensed was no longer only emotional. It was waiting inside Daniel's own body, revealed by a test he had taken after several weeks of unexplained anxiety. The clinic called him on a Tuesday morning. The doctor's voice was calm, almost painfully ordinary. "Mr. Reed, the doctor would like you to come in today." Daniel knew immediately that something was wrong. By afternoon, he was sitting alone in a small consultation room while a physician explained that his test had returned positive for HIV. The word seemed to arrive from a great distance. He heard the doctor explain that HIV was treatable, that modern medication could control the virus, and that a diagnosis did not mean his life was over. Daniel understood the medical information. Emotionally, he could barely breathe. He stared at his hands and thought about Emily. Then Marianne. Then every decision he had made during the previous year. Fear quickly became shame, even though the two were not the same thing. Daniel knew intellectually that HIV was a medical condition, not a moral judgment. Still, the stigma surrounding it pressed against him with brutal force. He imagined people discovering the diagnosis and immediately creating their own story about how he had become infected. He could not bear the thought of Emily looking at him that way. That silence followed him home too. He left the clinic carrying information sheets folded inside his jacket, and drove home without turning on the radio. For several hours, he sat in his parked car. His phone showed 3 messages from Emily. He did not answer. Instead, Daniel began reconstructing his recent past. He wrote down names, dates, relationships, and every possible circumstance that might help doctors determine when the infection had occurred. He made appointments for further testing and asked questions he was almost afraid to hear answered. Marianne. Not because Daniel immediately believed she had infected him. He had no proof of that, and the diagnosis alone could not establish where or when transmission had occurred. What disturbed him was something else. Marianne had known about his recent health concerns before he had told her. Weeks earlier, during one of their private conversations, she had asked whether he was feeling well. When Daniel asked why she wanted to know, she had changed the subject. Now he remembered another moment. She had asked whether he had spoken to a doctor. He had never told her he was considering one. Daniel searched their old messages. One message from Marianne read, "You need to be careful about what you think you know." At the time, he had assumed she meant Emily. Now it sounded different. That evening, Daniel drove to Marianne's house. She opened the door and immediately recognized the fear in his face. "What happened?" Daniel stepped inside. "Did you know?" Her expression tightened. "Know what?" He looked directly at her. "My diagnosis." Marianne froze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel watched her carefully. "I haven't told Emily." "I haven't told anyone except my doctor." Marianne swallowed. "I don't understand." "Then why did you ask me about my health weeks ago?" "I was worried about you." "You knew something." "No." The answer came too quickly. Daniel moved closer. "Did you tell anyone about me?" Marianne's eyes filled with something he could not identify. "I would never hurt you." Daniel almost laughed. "That isn't what I asked." She looked away. He noticed her hands trembling. And suddenly, the affair no longer felt like something buried in the past. It felt alive. Waiting. Daniel left the house with one terrifying realization. Marianne was hiding something, and whatever it was, she had been hiding it long before he received his diagnosis. For the first time, Daniel understood that discovering the truth might be more dangerous than living with a lie. Daniel had left Marianne's house carrying more questions than answers. But one question became impossible to avoid. Emily had a right to know. He asked her to meet him the following evening. They sat in a quiet corner of a restaurant where they had once celebrated their engagement. Daniel could barely look at her. "What happened?" Emily asked. Daniel took a breath. "I've been lying to you." She smiled nervously, expecting something about the diagnosis. "About your health?" "No." The words seemed to drain the warmth from his face. "I had an affair." Emily stared at him. "With who?" Daniel closed his eyes. "Your mother." For several seconds, Emily did not react. Then she laughed once, quietly, as though her mind had rejected the sentence. "My mother?" Daniel nodded. "How long?" "Months." The future Emily had imagined seemed to disappear without making a sound. The wedding, the house they planned to buy, the photographs, the children they had discussed, all of it suddenly felt like evidence from someone else's life. She stood. "You slept with my mother?" Daniel tried to reach for her hand. Emily pulled away. "Don't touch me." He began explaining, but every explanation sounded like another betrayal. He told her that he had been confused, that Marianne had understood his loneliness, that he had intended to end it. Emily looked at him with tears gathering in her eyes. "You didn't fall into this," she whispered. "You chose it." Then she called Marianne. Her mother answered almost immediately. "Emily, tell me it isn't true." Silence. That silence was enough. Emily drove to Marianne's house without remembering the journey. When Marianne opened the door, Emily walked past her and entered the living room where so many childhood memories had been made. "Why?" Marianne began crying. "I never wanted to hurt you. You slept with my fiancé. I loved him." Emily stared at her. "You loved him?" Marianne nodded. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I was lonely. He understood me." Emily's voice broke. "He understood you because you stole him from me." Marianne tried to defend herself, insisting that Daniel had chosen her too. But Emily was no longer listening. Daniel arrived minutes later, fearing what might happen if they confronted each other alone. Marianne turned toward him. "Tell her." Daniel's face hardened. "Tell her what?" "That you knew." "Knew what?" "That you might have been exposed to HIV." Emily looked between them. "What are you talking about?" Daniel finally revealed the diagnosis. Marianne went pale. "I didn't know you were positive," she said. "You knew enough to be afraid." Daniel answered, "That doesn't mean I infected you. I never said it did." But his voice carried an accusation that neither woman could ignore. He told Emily that after learning about the diagnosis, he had discovered Marianne new details about his health that he had never shared. He believed she had deliberately withheld information and used fear to keep him dependent on her. Marianne denied it. "You're blaming me for something I didn't do." Daniel shook his head. "I'm blaming you for what you did to all of us." Emily looked at her mother, searching for the woman who had protected her throughout childhood. She could not find her. "You were supposed to protect me," Emily said. Marianne reached toward her. Emily stepped backward. "No." She walked out into the night. As she drove away, her phone kept ringing. She ignored every call. For the first time in her life, she understood that love could become a weapon, and that the people closest to you could know exactly where to place the blade without mercy. Behind her, Daniel and Marianne remained in the house, surrounded by years of lies that could no longer be separated from the truth. Emily did not know who she hated more: the man who betrayed her, or the mother who had taught her to trust him. Emily's departure left Daniel standing in Marianne's living room, listening to the front door close behind the woman he had promised to marry. For several minutes, neither he nor Marianne spoke. The silence felt different now. There was no secret left worth protecting. Daniel understood that the affair was only the visible part of what had happened. Marianne had concealed things about his health, manipulated his fears, and repeatedly made him feel responsible for protecting her. He no longer trusted her explanations. The following morning, Daniel called his closest friend, Marcus Hale. They met at a coffee shop before work. Daniel looked exhausted. He had barely slept. "I told Emily everything," he said. Marcus studied him. "And?" "She left." Daniel looked down at his coffee. "She deserved the truth." Marcus hesitated. "Is that everything?" Daniel shook his head. "No. Marianne is hiding something." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet. But it's bigger than the affair." He told Marcus about the strange questions Marianne had asked about his health, the messages she had deleted, and the way her behavior had changed after he received his diagnosis. Marcus listened without interrupting. "You need to be careful," he finally said. Daniel nodded. "I am." But he was already planning what to do next. He wanted evidence. He wanted answers. Most of all, he wanted Emily to know the truth before Marianne could reshape it. Across town, Marianne sat alone in her kitchen, staring at her phone. Emily had blocked her number. Daniel had stopped responding to her messages. Every possible future seemed to be collapsing at once. She imagined Emily telling relatives. She imagined neighbors whispering. She imagined Daniel exposing every private conversation and every lie she had told to keep their relationship hidden. Her reputation had taken decades to build. She had destroyed it in months. Marianne opened an old message thread and began deleting conversations. Then she stopped. Her hands trembled. Deleting everything would look suspicious. She put the phone down. That evening, Daniel sent her one message. "We need to talk. One last time." Marianne replied almost immediately. "Where?" "My house. Tomorrow. 7. The next evening, Daniel waited in his living room with his phone recording audio in his pocket. He did not know whether Marianne would confess, lie, or threaten him. When she arrived, she looked frightened. Daniel opened the door. "You came. You said this was the last time." "It is." She stepped inside. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. Then Daniel spoke. "You knew things about my health before I told you." Marianne shook her head. "I already explained that." "No. You avoided the question. I was worried about you. You were afraid of what I would discover." Her expression hardened. "You think everything is about you." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You slept with your daughter's fiancé. You lied to her." "You lied to me. And now you want me to believe you're the victim?" Marianne's voice rose. "I loved you. You loved having control over me. That isn't true. Then tell me the truth." She stepped closer. "About what?" "Everything." Marianne stared at him. Daniel continued. "Whatever you know, whatever you've hidden, whatever happened before my diagnosis, I want it all." She became furious. "If you tell Emily anything else, you'll destroy her." Daniel froze. "You're still threatening me with her?" "I'm warning you." "No," he said. "You're afraid." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. Daniel pointed toward the door. "Emily deserves to know the whole truth." Marianne backed away. "You don't understand what that will do." "I understand exactly what it will do." She turned and hurried outside. Daniel remained standing at the doorway, watching her disappear into the darkness. Neither of them noticed the figure across the street, hidden behind a parked car. Someone had heard enough to know that the argument was not about an affair alone, and that witness would soon become important to the murder investigation. The witness remained still until Marianne's car disappeared around the corner. Only then did the person step away from the shadows, holding a phone with a recorded conversation. Whatever had been captured was incomplete, but it contained one sentence that could change everything. The witness's final words from the previous night were not yet known to investigators. By morning, the house had become a crime scene, and every minute before Daniel's death was being reconstructed. Detective Sarah Mercer returned to the living room shortly after sunrise. The darkness had disappeared, but the scene looked worse in daylight. Broken glass glittered beneath evidence markers. Blood had dried along the floor. Daniel's phone was sealed inside a plastic bag. Investigators found several messages sent to him during the hours before his death. Some were angry. Some were frightening. One simply read, "You should have kept your mouth shut." Another warned him that people were going to suffer if he continued talking. Mercer immediately wanted to know who had sent them. The answer was not obvious. Daniel had enemies at work, complicated personal relationships, and secrets that investigators were only beginning to uncover. His phone contained conversations with Emily, Marianne Marcus, and several numbers that had not yet been identified. Then Marianne gave her statement. She claimed she had arrived at the house shortly before police did. According to her, Daniel was already dead when she entered. She said she had found him on the floor, panicked, and remained there because she did not know what else to do. Her story sounded believable, until detectives compared it with the evidence. A security camera from a neighboring property showed Marianne's car arriving nearly 40 minutes earlier than she claimed. Mercer placed the photograph in front of her. "You said you arrived at 11:15. Marianne stared at the image. I may have been mistaken. You were 40 minutes mistaken. I was frightened. Mercer watched her carefully. Frightened people forget details. They don't usually forget 40 minutes. Marianne said nothing. Then investigators discovered another inconsistency. A message from Marianne's phone had been sent shortly before Daniel's death, but she insisted she had not spoken to him that evening. The case was changing. Marianne was no longer simply a witness. She was becoming a suspect. Then Emily arrived for questioning. She looked exhausted, angry, and deeply confused. When Mercer asked whether she had threatened Daniel, Emily immediately denied it. But investigators had already spoken to one of her friends. The friend remembered Emily saying, during an emotional conversation after discovering the affair, that she wished Daniel and Marianne would both disappear from her life. The sentence sounded different inside a police interview room. Emily began crying. I wanted them gone from my life. I didn't mean dead. Mercer believed that distinction mattered. But belief was not evidence. Emily admitted she had been furious with Daniel. She admitted she hated Marianne for betraying her. She also admitted that she had gone near the house recently, though she insisted she never entered. Did you kill Daniel? Emily looked at the detective for several seconds. No. Her answer was quiet. But investigators now had 3 people connected by betrayal, resentment, and fear. Marianne had lied about when she arrived. Emily had imagined a life without both of them. And Daniel had been threatening to expose secrets that could destroy them all. For Mercer, motive was everywhere, but motive alone could not solve a homicide. She needed the missing minutes, who arrived first, who left last, and what happened between the final message and the fatal confrontation. She ordered an examination of Daniel's phone, his vehicle, and nearby properties. Somewhere in those records, she believed, was a fact that one of the 3 had overlooked. By midnight, the detectives had learned something else. Daniel's final outgoing call had lasted less than a minute. By evening, Mercer wrote 3 names on the investigation board. Marianne Cole, Emily Cole, Daniel Reed. One was dead. One was lying. And one was hiding something. The question was no longer who had a reason to hate Daniel. It was who had the final reason to make him disappear. By the time investigators finished questioning Emily, Daniel's phone had become the most important piece of evidence in the case. The device contained conversations that had been partially deleted, but digital specialists were able to recover fragments from its storage. The first messages came from Marianne. Some were affectionate. Others were desperate. One message from Daniel read, "You cannot keep asking me to lie." Marianne had answered, "Then stop making threats." Another exchange was even more disturbing. Daniel warned that he would tell Emily everything if Marianne continued interfering in his life. Marianne responded that exposing the affair would destroy more than their relationship. It would destroy Emily. Detective Mercer read the recovered messages twice. The affair had not been a simple romance between 2 lonely people. It had become a struggle for control. Daniel wanted distance. Marianne wanted secrecy. And both seemed willing to use Emily's pain as leverage. But then investigators found something unexpected. There was another number. Daniel had communicated with it repeatedly during the weeks before his death. Unlike his conversations with Emily and Marianne, these messages were carefully hidden. The contact had no name, only a string of numbers. Mercer asked the digital analyst to recover everything available. What emerged changed the direction of the investigation. Daniel had written, "I need to know if she told you." The reply came several minutes later. "She hasn't told me anything." Another message from Daniel said, "Then we have a bigger problem." Mercer leaned back in her chair. Who was she? Marianne was the obvious possibility, but the conversation suggested Daniel was discussing information with someone who already knew part of the secret. Investigators began examining Daniel's movements. They discovered several meetings that had never appeared in his calendar. Coffee shops, a parking garage, a hotel lobby. None were connected to Emily. None were connected to Marianne. Daniel had been living another secret life. The possibility unsettled Mercer. Perhaps Daniel had manipulated both women. Perhaps he had used Marianne's feelings to maintain control while secretly threatening her. Perhaps Emily had never understood the full extent of his deception. Or perhaps Daniel had discovered something about someone else, and that person had decided he could not be allowed to reveal it. The mystery deepened when investigators recovered another deleted message from Marianne. "Please don't make me do something I will regret." Daniel's response was chilling. "You already did." Mercer wondered whether the message referred to the affair, the diagnosis, or something more serious. Then, the laboratory sent over a new finding. A partial fingerprint had been recovered from the broken glass near Daniel's body. It did not belong to Daniel. It did not belong to Marianne. And it did not belong to Emily. Investigators compared it against the people already connected to the case. There was no match. But another piece of evidence was waiting. A security camera across the street had captured someone approaching the house shortly before Marianne's arrival. The figure appeared to stop outside, look toward the windows, and then disappear from view. Mercer enlarged the image. The person was carrying something. Not a weapon. A phone. Someone had been watching the house. Someone had known Marianne would be there. And someone had left behind evidence that could make the police suspect her. For the first time, Mercer considered a possibility that changed everything. Maybe Marianne had not been framed because she was innocent. Maybe she had been framed because the real killer knew exactly how much evidence already pointed toward her. The murder was beginning to look less like a crime committed in anger and more like a crime carefully designed to leave a convenient suspect behind. And if that was true, the person manipulating the investigation had been planning for the police long before Daniel's body was discovered. But the person behind the hidden number remained unknown, and that secret promised to explain everything. Emily sat alone in the interview room, while the investigation around her seemed to grow larger with every question. She had spent days believing that if she remained silent, the pain might eventually become manageable. Instead, silence had made every memory more suspicious. Detective Mercer placed Daniel's photograph on the table. "You said you wanted them gone." Emily looked at the photograph. "I did." "Both of them?" "Yes." "Did you ever imagine hurting them?" Emily swallowed. "Yes." The admission hung between them. She explained that after learning about the affair, something inside her had broken. Then came Daniel's diagnosis, followed by the terrifying possibility that secrets had been kept from her about her own life and the man she trusted. She had been furious. She had imagined Daniel disappearing. She had imagined Marianne suffering for what she had done. Once, in the darkest moment, she had even imagined walking into the house and making both of them pay. But imagination was not action. "I thought terrible things," Emily whispered. "That doesn't mean I did terrible things." Mercer watched her carefully. "Where were you the night Daniel died?" "At home." "Can anyone confirm that?" Emily hesitated. "No." That answer weakened her story. Still, investigators could not arrest someone simply because grief and rage had produced violent thoughts. They needed evidence connecting Emily to Daniel's death. And the evidence was beginning to point somewhere else. A search of Marianne's home revealed photographs, letters, and gifts connected to Daniel. Some had been hidden inside a locked cabinet. Investigators also found evidence that Marianne had contacted Daniel repeatedly during the days before the murder. She had not simply been emotionally attached to him. She had been consumed by him. Mercer began to understand the psychology of the relationship. Marianne had become terrified of losing Daniel, terrified of losing Emily, and terrified that the truth would destroy the carefully constructed life she had spent years protecting. That made her central to the crime. But central did not necessarily mean killer. There was no clear physical evidence proving Marianne had delivered the fatal injury. Her lies were suspicious, her behavior was manipulative, and her relationship with Daniel had become dangerously obsessive, but suspicion still needed proof. Then Emily remembered something. It happened during another interview. Mercer asked her to describe everything she remembered about the night of the murder. Emily closed her eyes. "I remember driving past my mother's house. You said you stayed home." "I did. Earlier." She frowned. "There was something else." "What?" Emily looked toward the window. "I saw someone leaving through the back." Mercer leaned forward. "Who?" "I don't know. You never mentioned this before. I didn't think it mattered." "What did the person look like?" Emily struggled to remember. "Dark jacket. Maybe a man. I couldn't see the face." "Which direction did they go?" "Toward the alley." Mercer wrote everything down. Then Emily remembered one final detail. The person had stopped before disappearing. They had looked back at the house. Not like someone escaping in panic. Like someone checking whether the plan had worked. That detail changed the investigation again. Someone had been inside Marianne's house that night. Someone Emily had never mentioned. And if that person had been there before the police arrived, then the question was no longer whether Marianne had motive. It was whether someone had used Marianne's secret to create the perfect cover for murder. The detectives reopened the timeline immediately. They requested camera footage and searched the alley for witnesses. For Emily, the memory was terrifying because it meant a stranger had been watching everything unfold. The camera footage from the alley finally gave investigators the break they needed, but it did not provide the answer they expected. Instead, it revealed a secret that would force detectives to reconsider assumptions they had made about the case. The figure leaving Marianne's house was Emily. Mercer watched the recording several times. Emily had lied about being home. She had also concealed the fact that she had driven past the house. The evidence now placed her close to the scene during the critical hours. When Emily was questioned again, she finally stopped denying the truth. She had gone to Marianne's house intending to confront Daniel. She had discovered that Daniel was still secretly communicating with her mother. The discovery destroyed the fragile hope that the affair had truly ended. Emily had believed that after everything she had learned, Daniel would finally choose honesty. Instead, she found another message. She confronted him. Daniel tried to explain that he was attempting to understand Marianne's secrets and the circumstances surrounding his diagnosis. Emily heard only another excuse. "You're still lying to me," she said. "I was trying to protect you. You've been saying that from the beginning." The argument became louder. Emily remembered Daniel reaching toward her, remembered pushing him away, and remembered the sudden violence that followed. Afterward, the room became impossibly quiet. Emily stared at Daniel, unable to accept what she had done. She had not entered the house planning to kill him. But her anger, grief, humiliation, and months of psychological pressure had reached a point where she could no longer control herself. Then fear took over. She noticed the messages from Marianne. She remembered the threats, the arguments, and the evidence already pointing toward her mother. An idea formed. If investigators believed Marianne had confronted Daniel, the murder might be explained as the final consequence of their toxic relationship. Emily began altering the scene. She moved objects. She left evidence that could strengthen suspicion against Marianne. She deleted communications and tried to make the confrontation appear connected to the threats Daniel had received. But Emily did not know that Marianne had already discovered what happened. When Marianne returned, she found her daughter standing inside the house, shaking beside Daniel's body. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Marianne understood. "You did this?" Emily broke down. I didn't mean to. Marianne looked at Daniel, then at her daughter. She knew she should call the police. Instead, she remembered everything that had led there. The affair. The manipulation. The secrets. Her failure to protect Emily from the consequences of her own choices. So Marianne chose her daughter. Together, they constructed a false story. Marianne would claim she arrived after Daniel was dead. Emily would say she had been home. The threatening messages would make Marianne appear responsible. For a short time, the plan seemed convincing. But they had made one mistake. They agreed on details neither woman could actually know. Investigators discovered that Marianne described Daniel's position before police photographs showed it to her. Emily, meanwhile, mentioned a broken lamp that had been moved after the murder. Mercer placed the statements side by side. One detail could have been coincidence. Two were impossible. The women had not simply lied separately. They had rehearsed the same lie. And now detectives knew that the mother and daughter were protecting each other. The final question was no longer whether Emily had killed Daniel. It was why Marianne had been willing to let her daughter carry the secret alone. That answer would force both women to confront the truth they had spent months avoiding. The contradiction was enough to break the agreement between mother and daughter. When detectives confronted them separately, Emily lasted less than 20 minutes. She confessed. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she described the confrontation with Daniel, the anger that overwhelmed her, and the moment she realized that the man she loved was no longer going to walk out of the house alive. I was angry, she said. I wanted everything to stop. Detective Mercer asked why she had staged the scene. Because I was afraid. Afraid of prison? Emily shook her head. Afraid of losing my mother too. That answer explained the final piece. Marianne had not killed Daniel, but she had chosen to protect the person who did. When detectives confronted her with Emily's confession, Marianne finally stopped defending herself. She admitted the affair. She admitted that she had manipulated Daniel after he tried to leave. She admitted that she had used Emily's feelings to keep him silent, and that she had hidden information because she feared losing control of the situation. Most painfully, she admitted that after discovering Daniel's body, she chose her daughter over the truth. I knew what I should have done, Marianne said. Mercer looked at her. But you didn't. No. Why? Marianne lowered her head. Because she was my child. There was no dramatic excuse afterward. No sudden explanation that could make years of deception disappear. The prosecution eventually presented the case as a chain rather than a single moment of madness. Daniel's death had grown from secrecy. The affair created betrayal. Manipulation created fear. Fear created resentment. Resentment became rage. And when the truth finally surfaced, everyone involved made another choice to remain silent. Emily pleaded guilty to the killing. Her sentence ended the legal uncertainty, but it could not restore the future she had lost. The wedding never happened. The home she and Daniel had planned was sold. Photographs from their engagement disappeared into boxes she could not bring herself to open. Daniel's family remembered him differently from the man described in the investigation. To them, he was not simply the center of a scandal. He was a son, a friend, and a man who had made terrible decisions while trying to escape the consequences of them. Marianne received her own sentence for the crimes connected to the cover-up, and spent the years afterward confronting a punishment that no court could fully impose. Emily stopped visiting. That absence became Marianne's deepest consequence. She had spent years terrified that the truth would destroy her relationship with her daughter. In the end, it was the lies meant to protect that relationship that destroyed it. Emily, meanwhile, carried Daniel's memory with conflicting emotions. She loved him. She hated him. She blamed him. She blamed herself. None of those feelings could change what had happened. Years later, she would still remember the night she stood outside her mother's house, believing she was walking toward an argument. She had not known she was walking toward the end of her old life. The case eventually became another file in a courthouse archive, another story investigators discussed when teaching how motive can hide inside relationships. But its deepest lesson was not about jealousy. It was about silence. Daniel's death was not caused by one secret alone. It was the final consequence of several people choosing silence until the truth became impossible to contain. And by the time the truth finally emerged, it could explain the murder. It could not undo it. The tragedy was that everyone involved had believed a lie might prevent a disaster. Daniel concealed his choices because he feared losing Emily. Marianne concealed the affair because she feared losing them. Emily concealed her rage because she feared becoming someone she could not recognize. After the killing, Marianne concealed the truth because she feared losing her daughter. Each decision seemed small when made. Together, they became irreversible.